The bullets whistled overhead as the rookie soldiers huddled behind inadequate cover, frozen with fear. Through the smoke and chaos, one small figure moved directly into the kill zone, the same medic they had mocked just hours earlier for her basic first aid skills. Now, as enemy fire tore up the earth around her, she crawled toward the fallen colonel with surgical precision in her movements, her hands steady despite rounds striking inches from her body. The rookies watched in stunned disbelief as the woman they had underestimated performed life-saving procedures in the middle of a firefight, using her own body as a shield while bullets kicked up dirt all around her. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you value stories of unsung heroes who never seek recognition but deserve it more than anyone, subscribe to join our community of respectful storytelling. The morning sun cast long shadows across forward operating base Sentinel as Specialist Zephyr LaRue methodically arranged her medical supplies. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, organizing advanced surgical tools, specialized clotting agents, and chest decompression needles with the efficiency of someone who had done this countless times before. A small scar near her temple caught the light as she worked, her weathered eyes focused entirely on the task at hand. The relative quiet shattered as 4 soldiers from the 75th Battalion swaggered into the tent, their boots kicking up dust that danced in the slanting sunlight. "Hope we get some actual action this time," announced Sergeant Bridger Hendricks, a cocky grin splitting his face as he made a show of checking his weapon. "Last patrol was a waste of ammo." Private Tarek Ace Nassar chuckled. "Maybe we'll finally get to show these locals what real soldiers look like." Privates Ren Callahan and Sorrel Kane followed close behind, fresh-faced and eager to prove themselves. Their eyes briefly swept over Zephyr before dismissing her, just another support staff in their minds. The tent flap opened again, and Colonel Emmett Hawthorne entered. Weathered by decades of service, the colonel commanded immediate respect, his presence causing the rookies to straighten their postures. He acknowledged each soldier with a nod, pausing fractionally longer when his eyes met Zephyr's. Something unspoken passed between them, a subtle recognition that drew confused glances from the rookies. "We deploy in 30, Hawthorne announced. "We're patrolling the Khazari Valley today. Intelligence suggests increased movement in the area. Check your gear twice." As the colonel exited, Hendricks rolled his eyes. "Great. Babysitting duty with just a basic medic for backup." He raised his voice to ensure Zephyr could hear. "Hope you packed enough Band-Aids, sweetheart." Ace snickered. "Hey, Hendricks, think she knows which end of the bandage to use?" "Just stay out of our way when things get hot, Band-Aid," Hendricks called over. "We'll handle the real work." Throughout the mockery, Zephyr remained silent. Her only reaction, a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw as she continued packing equipment that spoke volumes about her qualifications, equipment the rookies were too ignorant to recognize. During the final equipment check, Hendricks deliberately bumped into Zephyr's medical pack, knocking several items to the ground. "Oops," he said with exaggerated concern. "Hope none of those aspirin broke." The rookies laughed as Zephyr calmly gathered her scattered supplies. Colonel Hawthorne reappeared at the tent entrance. "We're moving out. Final checks now." As the soldiers filed past him, Zephyr performed one last inspection of her equipment. For just a moment, her eyes reflected something distant and haunted, ghosts of battlefields past that vanished as quickly as they had appeared. The patrol moved through the rocky terrain of Khazari Valley in formation. Massive stone walls rose on either side, creating natural choke points and endless potential hiding places. The rookies maintained their bravado, but their eyes darted nervously to the heights above. Zephyr consistently positioned herself with tactical awareness, always maintaining cover, checking sight lines, scanning elevated positions. It was a behavior only Colonel Hawthorne seemed to notice or appreciate. During a water break in the shadow of an overhanging cliff, the rookies continued their mockery. Sorrel unscrewed his canteen. "So what'd you do to get stuck out here, Band-Aid? Mess up taking someone's temperature?" "Probably couldn't handle a real medical posting," Ren added with a smirk. "This is where they send the washouts." Zephyr took a measured sip from her own canteen, her silence neither confirming nor denying their assumptions. As they approached a particularly exposed ridgeline, Zephyr instinctively dropped to a lower profile. Colonel Hawthorne immediately did the same, while the rookies remained fully upright until the colonel barked an order to get down. A knowing glance passed between Hawthorne and Zephyr, the quiet recognition between two experienced soldiers. An hour into the patrol, a local shepherd approached, guiding his small flock across their path. Hendricks immediately grew confrontational, his hand tightening on his weapon. "Hold up!" he called out, signaling to the others. "We've got company!" The shepherd raised his hands in the universal gesture of peace, but Zephyr noticed details the others missed. The man's nervous eyes that never settled in one place, the radio partially concealed beneath his traditional clothing, the unusual route that made no sense for grazing animals. She quietly shifted position, subtly placing herself where she could better cover the colonel. "Sir," she said quietly to Hawthorne, her voice almost inaudible to the others. "He's the third shepherd we've seen on a route that has no grazing." Hawthorne nodded almost imperceptibly. "Keep your eyes open." The patrol continued deeper into the valley, the walls narrowing around them. The rookies grew increasingly tense, though they masked it with continued bravado. Zephyr's movements became even more vigilant, her eyes constantly scanning the high ground. When Wren tripped on loose shale, Zephyr's reflexes were lightning fast, her hand shooting out to catch the private before she fell. The momentary contact pushed up Zephyr's sleeve, revealing a tattoo partially visible beneath the fabric, the insignia of the elite combat medical response team, a unit legendary for operating in the most dangerous hot zones. But Wren, regaining her balance, failed to notice it. "Watch your step," Zephyr said quietly, already refocusing on their surroundings. As they reached the center of the valley, the most exposed position with the least cover, Zephyr suddenly stiffened. Her eyes locked onto a barely visible flash of metal from the ridgeline above. "Contact high," she began in an urgent whisper, but the warning was cut short by the crack of gunfire echoing off the valley walls. The world exploded into chaos. Multiple enemy positions opened fire simultaneously, bullets kicking up dust and ricocheting off rocks around the patrol. The ambush had been meticulously planned, the patrol caught in a perfect crossfire with minimal cover available. Colonel Hawthorne shouted orders, attempting to direct the team toward what little protection the terrain offered. Before he could reach cover himself, 3 rounds struck him in the chest. He collapsed in the most exposed part of the valley floor, exactly where the ambush had been designed to create a casualty that would draw others into the kill zone. "Colonel's down!" Hendricks shouted, his earlier cockiness evaporating as reality set in. The rookies scrambled for whatever cover they could find, pressing themselves against inadequate rock formations, their training seemingly forgotten in the face of actual combat. Their returning fire was sporadic and ineffective, fear evident in their wide eyes. "Someone has to get the colonel," Sorrel yelled, though he made no move to leave his position. Ace frantically tried to radio for support while Wren stared in horror at the colonel's motionless form in the center of the exposed ground. None of them moved toward him, the distance too great, the fire too intense. In the midst of the chaos, something shifted in Zephyr's demeanor. The quiet, reserved medic they'd been mocking disappeared, replaced by something else entirely, a focused combat professional with ice in her veins. Without a word, she shed her outer gear, keeping only her essential medical kit secured tightly against her body. "Cover the northeast ridge," she commanded with unexpected authority, her voice cutting through the gunfire with surprising power. Before anyone could respond, she was moving, not away from danger but directly into it. Her movements were fluid, tactical, using micro-terrain features the rookies hadn't even noticed. She slithered forward on her elbows and knees, timing her advances between enemy fire cycles with uncanny precision. From their positions of relative safety, the rookies watched in disbelief as Zephyr navigated the bullet-swept terrain. She used smoke from an impact site for concealment, threw debris to create momentary distractions, and utilized every depression in the ground to make herself a smaller target. "What the hell is she doing?" Wren whispered, unable to look away. "She's going to get herself killed," Hendricks muttered, though his tone carried more awe than criticism now. After what seemed like an eternity, though it was barely 2 minutes, Zephyr reached the colonel. Without hesitation, her hands moved with surgical precision despite the bullets impacting around her. She cut away his body armor, identified the entry wounds, and began working with focused intensity. The rookies watched, transfixed, as she extracted fragments, applied advanced hemostatic agents, and inserted a chest tube with battlefield neurosurgery-level skill, all while completely exposed to enemy fire. When a concentrated barrage targeted their position, Zephyr unhesitatingly shifted to cover the colonel with her own body while continuing to work. A bullet grazed her shoulder, tearing through her uniform, but her hands never faltered. In that moment, the truth dawned on the watching rookies. The basic medic they'd been mocking wasn't basic at all. The way she worked, her calm under fire, her tactical movements, this was someone extraordinary. Zephyr stabilized the colonel, then retrieved his radio. "Zero actual, this is Nomad," she called in, her voice steady and authoritative despite the bullets still flying. "Colonel has multiple GSWs, tension pneumothorax resolved, major hemorrhage contained, request immediate CASEVAC at coordinates follows." At the call sign Nomad, Ace's eyes widened in shock. He'd heard stories about that designation, whispered legends in the special operations community about a near-mythical combat physician who'd saved an entire platoon during the infamous Coast Valley massacre. With the colonel stabilized but still in the kill zone, Zephyr called out to the rookies. "I need covering fire on my mark, concentrated on the eastern ridge, 5-second bursts." The rookies hesitated for only a moment before responding with perfect execution, their earlier mockery replaced by absolute trust. Under their covering fire, Zephyr began the agonizing process of dragging the colonel to safer ground, shielding his body with her own during the most exposed segments of the journey. By the time the medevac helicopter touched down at the extraction point 20 minutes later, Zephyr's uniform was soaked with blood, both the colonel's and her own. Yet she continued working, giving precise medical updates to the flight medic who immediately deferred to her judgment, another sign of her true status that didn't go unnoticed by the rookies. As the helicopter lifted off with both Zephyr and the colonel aboard, the remaining patrol members stared after it in stunned silence. "Who the hell is she?" Wren finally asked, voice barely audible over the receding rotor sounds. Ace shook his head slowly. "I think we've been patrolling with a ghost." 3 days later, the truth about Specialist Zephyr LaRue spread through Forward Operating Base Sentinel like wildfire. She wasn't just a combat medic, but Major Zephyr LaRue, MD, one of the most decorated battlefield surgeons in modern military history. After losing patients in a previous deployment due to the critical time gap between injury and treatment, she had requested reassignment to forward units, believing she could save more lives by being closer to the point of injury. The rookies learned that Nomad was indeed the legendary physician from the Coast Valley massacre, where she had saved 17 critically wounded soldiers while under continuous enemy fire for 6 hours. Her actions had earned her the Silver Star, but the psychological toll had driven her to step back from recognition, preferring to work quietly where she was needed most. The barracks fell silent when Zephyr returned that evening, her shoulder professionally bandaged, but otherwise looking as composed as ever. The room's atmosphere had transformed completely, where once there had been dismissive mockery, now there was profound respect bordering on awe. Sergeant Hendricks approached her, humility evident in his demeanor. "Major," he said, struggling to meet her eyes. We didn't know." Zephyr regarded him steadily. "That's the point, Sergeant. You never know who someone is until the worst moment comes." The following morning, Colonel Hawthorne, still recovering but insistent on being present, called the unit together. Though visibly weak and against medical advice, he stood at attention before the assembled company. "I've served with heroes throughout my career," the colonel began, his voice carrying despite its weakness. "But rarely have I witnessed the level of courage displayed by Major LaRue 3 days ago." With effort, Hawthorne straightened to his full height and raised his hand in a formal salute directed at Zephyr, the highest sign of respect an officer could show. One by one, the rookies followed suit, then the entire company, until every soldier present stood at attention, honoring the quiet physician they had failed to recognize in their midst. Later that evening, Hendricks and the other rookies approached Zephyr as she inventoried medical supplies in the aid station. "Major," Hendricks began, "if you're willing, we'd like to learn, really learn, whatever you're willing to teach us." For the first time since they'd met her, Zephyr smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her serious features. "Let's start with pressure dressings," she said, reaching for supplies. "You never know when you'll need one." 6 months later, a transport helicopter deposited a new group of rookies at Forward Operating Base Sentinel. As they made their way toward the barracks, they passed a training session in progress, Zephyr and Hendricks' team working together on advanced field medical procedures, now a tight-knit unit with visible mutual respect. One of the new privates nudged another. "That's just the medic team," he said dismissively. "The real action is with combat units." Sergeant Hendricks, overhearing the comment, broke away from the exercise and approached the newcomers. "Let me tell you about the day I learned what courage really looks like," he said, resting a hand on the private's shoulder. "It started when we all made the mistake you just made." As Hendricks began recounting the story, Zephyr could be seen in the background, continuing her work without fanfare, not seeking recognition, just doing what needed to be done. The new private listened with growing interest as Hendricks described the fateful patrol, his eyes widening at the description of the ambush and Zephyr's actions under fire. "But why would someone with her credentials choose to be here?" the private asked when Hendricks finished. "She could be running a medical unit somewhere safe." "That's exactly what I asked her," Hendricks replied, his gaze drifting to where Zephyr was demonstrating a technique to Ren. "She told me that in the field hospital, she could save maybe 1 in 3 of the critical cases that came to her. But here, being right there when it happens, she could save 9 out of 10. He paused, letting that sink in. She chose to put herself in danger every single day because she believed it was where she could do the most good, not where she'd get the most recognition or have the most comfort, but where she could save the most lives. The private's skeptical expression had completely vanished. "I had no idea." "None of us did," Hendricks admitted. "And that was our first mistake." Later that night, in the mess hall, the story of Major LaRue came up again when the base commander stopped by the rookies' table. The grizzled veteran overheard them discussing Zephyr and paused. "You know why she requested the transfer here?" he asked, setting down his tray uninvited. Without waiting for an answer, he continued. "The Coast Valley Massacre. Her forward surgical team was supporting a special operations mission that went sideways. Enemy forces surrounded their position, cutting off evacuation for nearly 7 hours. The mess hall seemed to quiet around them as others tuned in. She performed 23 major surgeries under direct fire, including a field craniotomy with nothing but a basic medical kit and a drill from a mechanic's toolbox. When they finally got evac helicopters in, she insisted all patients go first. By the time they came back for the medical staff, the enemy had broken through the perimeter. The commander took a bite of his food, chewing slowly as tension built. 3 of the 5 medical staff were killed. LaRue took a round to the abdomen but kept working on the last wounded soldier. When they were finally extracted, she'd been operating continuously for almost 14 hours, 4 of those while wounded herself. He pointed his fork toward the door where, through the open entryway, they could see Zephyr crossing the compound. After she recovered, the brass wanted to give her a desk, medals, the works. She refused everything except the Silver Star, which she accepted only because they made it an order. Instead of taking a cushy hospital posting, she requested reassignment to forward units as a basic medic. "But why?" one of the rookies asked. "Because she believed if she'd been there, on the front lines from the beginning, more of those soldiers might have survived, that the critical minutes between injury and treatment were where lives were lost." The commander stood, gathering his tray. "That woman carries those deaths with her every day, and her response was to put herself directly in harm's way so it wouldn't happen again." As he walked away, the rookies sat in contemplative silence, watching through the doorway as Zephyr continued her evening routine, utterly unaware of being the subject of their conversation. The next morning found Zephyr instructing an expanded group, now including several of the new arrivals who had requested to join her training session. They practiced emergency procedures with intense focus, hanging on her every word. During a brief break, Ren approached her with a question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "Major," she began hesitantly, "that day in the valley, when you reached the colonel, how did you stay so calm? There were bullets hitting inches away from you." Zephyr considered the question, taking a sip from her canteen before answering. "I learned long ago that panic has never saved a single life," she said simply. "Fear is natural, but it's also a luxury that dying people can't afford from their caretakers." She demonstrated a proper chest seal application as she continued. "In the moment, there is only the patient and what needs to be done. Everything else, including your own safety, becomes secondary. It's not bravery," she added, seeing Ren's expression. "It's focus." "But weren't you afraid?" Ace asked, joining the conversation. "Terrified," Zephyr admitted without hesitation. "Fear is not the enemy. Letting it control your actions is." The training sessions became a regular fixture, with Zephyr gradually revealing more advanced techniques as the group mastered the basics. What had begun as remedial instruction for rookies who had mocked her evolved into an elite combat medical training program that drew participants from across the base. Colonel Hawthorne, fully recovered and back on duty, frequently observed these sessions. One evening, he requested a private meeting with Zephyr. "The brass has taken notice of your training program," he said without preamble when she reported to his office. "They're considering formalizing it, creating an official combat medical responder certification based on your methods." Zephyr remained expressionless, though a slight tension in her shoulders betrayed her discomfort with attention. "With all due respect, sir, I'm just teaching what I know." "What you know has already saved dozens of lives, not just the patients you've treated personally, but through those you've trained." Hawthorne picked up a folder from his desk. "Command wants to promote you, give you proper resources, expand this program throughout the region. I'm most effective in the field, Colonel. We both know that." Hawthorne studied her for a moment. "You don't have to punish yourself forever, Major." Her eyes flickered up sharply. "Sir? Coast Valley wasn't your fault. The men you couldn't save, that wasn't on you." Zephyr's carefully maintained composure wavered slightly. "With all due respect, you weren't there." "No, but I've read every after-action report. I've spoken with survivors." He leaned forward. "Not a single one believes you failed them. Quite the opposite. The only person who believes that is you." The silence stretched between them until Hawthorne sighed. "Think about the promotion, about what you could do with proper backing. You don't have to decide now." Later that night, Zephyr sat alone on a supply crate at the edge of the base, staring out at the dark mountains beyond. The sound of approaching footsteps didn't cause her to turn, even when Hendricks sat down beside her. "Heard about the promotion offer," he said without preamble. "News travels fast." "Always does." Hendricks followed her gaze to the distant peaks. "You going to take it?" "I haven't decided." "Can I offer an opinion?" She gave him a sidelong glance. "Since when do you ask permission?" He chuckled, then grew serious. 6 months ago, I was an arrogant idiot who thought a combat patch made me better than a medic. I nearly got our colonel killed because I was too busy showing off to notice the signs of an ambush." Zephyr remained silent, letting him continue. "What you did that day changed me. Not just because it was brave, but because afterward, you didn't hold it against us. You didn't lord it over us that you were right, that we were wrong. You just taught us, made us better." He picked up a small stone, turning it over in his fingers. "If you took that promotion, think how many more people you could teach, how many lives that would save." "I'm not a teacher," she said quietly. "I'm a doctor." "With all due respect, Major, you're both." He stood, brushing dust from his uniform. "And both save lives." The following week, a new convoy arrived at the base, bringing supplies, replacement personnel, and a visitor, General Ellis from Regional Command. He requested an immediate meeting with Major LaRue and Colonel Hawthorne. In the colonel's office, the general wasted no time. "Major, I've reviewed your service record and the recent incident reports. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it." He fixed her with an evaluating stare. "I've also reviewed your original request to be assigned to forward combat units against all standard protocols." Zephyr stood at attention, her expression neutral. At the time, many thought it was PTSD driving that request, a trauma response to Coast Valley. Some still do. The general placed a folder on the colonel's desk. "But your actions here have demonstrated otherwise." He opened the folder, revealing official documents with numerous signatures. "I'm here to offer you command of a new medical response training unit. You'll design the program, select the instructors, and oversee implementation across 3 forward operating bases, with potential expansion theater-wide if successful." Zephyr's carefully maintained composure slipped for just a moment, genuine surprise showing in her eyes. "This isn't a desk job, Major," the general continued. "You'll still be in the field, still treating patients, but you'll also be creating a legacy that could save thousands." Colonel Hawthorne watched her carefully, seeing the internal struggle play out behind her disciplined exterior. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" she finally asked. "Granted. I'm just one doctor. What happened in the valley could have been done by any properly trained combat medic. The fact that it wasn't speaks to a systemic training failure, not my individual skill." The general's eyebrows rose slightly. That's precisely why we need you heading this program, Major. You understand the problem better than anyone. If I accept this position, Zephyr said slowly, measuring each word, I have conditions. The general's expression remained neutral, but he exchanged a brief glance with Colonel Hawthorne. I'm listening. First, I maintain field rotations. I won't become an administrator who forgets what combat medicine actually requires. The general nodded. Reasonable. Second, I select my own team, without interference based on rank or connections. That can be arranged. Third, she continued, her voice gaining confidence, the program must emphasize that every soldier is a potential first responder. Medical training isn't just for designated medics. The general considered her for a moment before responding. Your terms are acceptable, Major. I'll have the orders drawn up immediately. You'll report to regional headquarters next week to begin outlining the program structure. After he departed, Colonel Hawthorne turned to Zephyr with a rare smile. Well done, Major, though I suspect the general came prepared to agree to just about anything you asked. Sir, your reputation precedes you. After what happened in the valley, there isn't a commander in theater who wouldn't want you training their medical personnel. Later that day, Zephyr gathered her original trainees, the former rookies who had once mocked her skills. I've accepted a new position, she told them directly. I'll be establishing a combat medical response training program at regional headquarters. Their faces registered varying degrees of surprise and disappointment. So you're leaving? Wren asked, unable to hide her dismay. Not exactly. Zephyr looked at each of them in turn. I'm authorized to select my own team. I want all of you to come with me as my first cadre of instructors. Stunned silence greeted her announcement. Us? Hendricks finally managed. But we're not medics. Exactly, Zephyr replied. You've learned these skills from scratch, overcome your preconceptions, and mastered techniques that once seemed impossible to you. You're ideally positioned to teach others to do the same. Ace looked skeptical. With all respect, Major, there must be more qualified personnel available. There are plenty of skilled medics, Zephyr agreed. What I need are teachers who understand the journey from ignorance to competence, who remember what it's like to feel overwhelmed by medical emergencies. Who better than soldiers who once thought bandages were just for scrapes? Gradually, their expressions shifted from doubt to consideration. When do we start? Hendricks asked. 1 month later, the Combat Medical Response Training Center opened at regional headquarters. Zephyr's team had transformed an abandoned motor pool into a state-of-the-art facility with simulated battlefield environments, advanced medical mannequins, and comprehensive training modules. The first class consisted of 40 soldiers from various units, most with minimal medical experience beyond basic first aid. Many arrived with the same dismissive attitude the rookies had once displayed. Zephyr stood before them on the first day, her quiet presence commanding attention without effort. Each of you believes you're here to learn how to be a better medic, she began. You're wrong. You're here to learn that every soldier is a medic when bullets start flying. The difference between a casualty and a survivor often isn't fancy equipment or specialized knowledge. It's the immediate actions of the nearest person, medic or not. She gestured to her team, now dressed in instructor uniforms. 6 months ago, Sergeant Hendricks and his team thought medical training was beneath them. When their colonel was shot during an ambush, they froze while a single medic crawled through enemy fire to save him. Her voice remained even, factual. Today, they could each perform emergency cricothyroidotomy under fire if necessary. The question is whether you're willing to learn what they learned. The training program was brutally effective. Zephyr combined realistic simulations with actual field rotations, ensuring her students faced genuine emergencies under supervision. She was an exacting teacher, accepting nothing less than perfection in critical techniques while emphasizing adaptability when ideal conditions weren't available. 3 months into the program, Zephyr received unexpected visitors. 2 members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff had flown in specifically to observe her methods after hearing reports of dramatically improved survival rates among units with her graduates. Admiral Lancaster, a career naval officer with a reputation for bluntness, watched a particularly intense simulation involving multiple casualties in a night environment before approaching her. Impressive program, Major, he commented as simulated gunfire and smoke filled the training ground. Though I question whether all this theatrical production is necessary. Zephyr met his gaze directly. With respect, Admiral, the theatrics serve a purpose. Combat medicine isn't practiced in quiet rooms with good lighting. If they can perform under these conditions, they can perform anywhere. Fair point, he conceded. Your results speak for themselves. 7% increase in survival rates for critical injuries where your graduates were present. That translates to hundreds of lives. It's a start, she replied, but we can do better. The Admiral studied her with newfound interest. You know, there's discussion about implementing this program military-wide. It would mean a promotion, a move to the Pentagon. I decline, Zephyr said without hesitation. I haven't officially offered yet, the Admiral noted with raised eyebrows. My work is here, sir, in the field. After the high-ranking visitors departed, Hendricks found Zephyr recalibrating training equipment alone. Did you really just turn down a promotion from a Joint Chief? He asked incredulously. It wasn't official, she replied without looking up. But you would have. She finally paused her work. Some people are meant to be at headquarters making policy. Others belong in the field. I know where I'm most effective. Hendricks leaned against the wall. You know what I realized today? I've never asked about Coast Valley. None of us have. Zephyr's hands stilled completely. There's not much to tell beyond the official record. We both know that's not true. Hendricks' voice was gentle but insistent. You carry it with you every day. We all see it. For several long moments, Zephyr remained silent, her face unreadable. Then slowly, she set down her tools. We were supposed to be 10 miles from the fighting, she began quietly. A forward surgical station, but in a secure location. The intel was wrong. Enemy forces had already infiltrated the area when we set up. The memory played clearly in her mind as she spoke. The first wounded arrived just as we realized we were surrounded. 3 Special Forces operators, badly injured. We had no choice but to begin treating them, even as the perimeter was collapsing. She described how more casualties arrived as the fighting intensified, how her small medical team worked frantically as bullets tore through the tent walls around them. The worst was Captain Mercer, shrapnel to the brain. In a proper facility with proper equipment, his chances would have been maybe 50-50. In that tent, with enemy fire coming closer every minute, she paused. They were almost 0. Her voice remained clinical, detached, but her eyes told a different story. I decided to try anyway. Used a mechanics drill from a toolbox to relieve the pressure on his brain. It was crude, desperate, probably against every medical protocol, but he was going to die otherwise. Did he make it? Hendricks asked softly. He did. One of 17 who survived. Her expression darkened. There were 28 casualties total. The unspoken number hung between them. 11 dead. You saved 17 lives in an impossible situation, Hendricks said. Most doctors wouldn't have saved any. A better doctor would have saved more. For the first time since he'd known her, real emotion broke through Zephyr's composed exterior. I keep thinking about those minutes between injury and treatment. If I'd been there, on the front line instead of waiting at the surgical station, how many more might have lived? Understanding dawned on Hendricks' face. That's why you requested reassignment as a combat medic, why you put yourself in danger every day. She nodded once, the simple gesture weighted with years of carried guilt. Zephyr, he said, using her first name for the first time, you can't be everywhere. You can't save everyone. I know, she admitted. That's why this program matters so much. If I can teach enough soldiers, maybe they can be where I can't. The following week, Zephyr was conducting a field exercise when urgent news arrived. A major operation in the eastern provinces had gone badly wrong. Multiple casualties were inbound to the nearest field hospital, which was severely understaffed due to a recent rotation. Without hesitation, Zephyr assembled a team from her instructors and advanced students. They reached the field hospital just as the first helicopters landed, disgorging wounded soldiers with injuries ranging from moderate to catastrophic. For the next 14 hours, Zephyr worked without break, moving from patient to patient with the same focused precision she'd shown in the valley. Her trainees performed admirably alongside her, putting their hard-earned skills to the ultimate test. When the crisis finally abated, 38 wounded had been treated. All survived. The field hospital's commanding officer, A veteran surgeon who had initially regarded Zephyr's team with skepticism approached her as she finally took a moment's rest. "I've been a military surgeon for 20 years," he said without preamble. "I've never seen a mass casualty response that effective. Your people saved lives today that would have been lost under standard protocols." Zephyr, exhausted but still alert, accepted the compliment with a simple nod. "I want your training program implemented here," the commander continued. "Not just for my medical staff, but for everyone on this base." Word of the field hospital's success spread quickly. Within weeks, Zephyr was fielding requests from bases throughout the region, all wanting to implement her program. The burden of administration grew, threatening to pull her away from the hands-on teaching and fieldwork she valued. Colonel Hawthorne, visiting to observe her program's progress, found her working late, surrounded by requisition forms and training schedules. "You need staff support," he noted, taking in the overwhelming paperwork. "Actual administrators." "What I need is to be in the field with my trainees," she replied, frustration evident in her voice. "Then delegate. That's what leaders do." Hawthorne sat across from her. "You've proven your point, Major. You've created something valuable, something that saves lives. Now you need to ensure it survives beyond your personal involvement." Zephyr looked up, a question in her eyes. "Build systems, not dependencies," Hawthorne clarified. "If this program relies entirely on you, it dies when you inevitably burn out. But if you build it right, train the right people to carry it forward, it becomes your legacy." The wisdom in his words was undeniable. Reluctantly, Zephyr began to restructure the program, identifying key personnel who could maintain its standards without her constant presence. She developed comprehensive training manuals, standardized procedures that could be replicated anywhere, and certification processes to ensure quality. 6 months after the program's inception, Zephyr stood before a graduating class 3 times larger than the first. Among the attendees were several high-ranking officers from various branches, there to witness the program that was rapidly becoming legendary within military medical circles. "When you return to your units," she told the graduates, "you won't just be better medics. You'll be teachers. Each of you is responsible for sharing these skills with your comrades, for ensuring that no one in your vicinity ever bleeds out from a preventable cause, for making sure no one ever freezes when action is needed." She surveyed their faces, seeing in them the same transformation she'd witnessed in Hendricks and the original rookies. Medicine isn't about who you are or what rank you hold. It's about what you do when someone's life depends on your actions. Remember that when the moment comes. As the ceremony concluded, Hendricks approached with news that a new group of rookies had just arrived at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, among them several who had specifically requested medical cross-training based on stories they'd heard about the Valley incident. "Seems your reputation keeps growing," he remarked. Zephyr allowed herself a small smile. "Not mine. Ours." In that moment, surrounded by graduates who would carry her teachings to units across the globe, Zephyr finally began to make peace with the ghosts of Coast Valley. She couldn't save everyone. No one could. But through these soldiers, through the knowledge she'd imparted, lives that would have been lost would now be saved. And somewhere, in a distant battlefield not yet fought, when chaos erupted and casualties mounted, someone who had once been dismissed as just a medic would step forward with skilled hands and calm focus, becoming the difference between life and death for those around them. That was a legacy worth building.